So Emily, what's your point today?
Well, now 7 states have required pornography websites to have age verification, allowing users to access them within their states. So there's been heavy focus on Mississippi, Virginia. Those are 2 earlier this summer. You can see that on the screen. This is a Gizmodo headline. How you can't access Pornhub in Mississippi or Virginia anymore. Why is that? Because their age verification laws, Pornhub felt they could not comply with. And so people who go there in those states see an explanation basically for why they're not operating in those states anymore. Louisiana was the first state to do this, so there's been a huge amount of focus on that. But as Politico magazine, which had a great story examining some of these bills, how they came to pass, and then what's been happening to Pornhub explains, now identical bills to that Louisiana one have passed in 6 other states: Arkansas, Montana, Mississippi, Utah, Virginia, and Texas. So not just super deep red states. Montana is a Democratic senator. Obviously, Virginia, I would argue, is blue, even though it has a Republican governor right now. And others are pretty conservative there. But these are bills that are passing with pretty big margins, despite being fought bitterly by the pornography industry, which is a huge industry right now. The online pornography industry, absolutely massive, big business at this point. And they're being signed by, as Politico notes, Democratic, Republican governors. And this is a quote from the story: "In just over a year, age verification laws have become perhaps the most bipartisan policy in the country, and they are creating havoc in a porn industry that many had considered all but impossible to actually regulate." I think that's really important. And Politico magazine goes on to explain why. They say, quote, "They are having real effects on how the massive online porn industry does business. Pornhub, the YouTube of pornography, gets more global users than Amazon or Netflix. In 2019, the last year Pornhub released its data, the site was visited 42 billion times, or 115 million times each day. But according to Ethical Capital Partners, the private equity company that owns Pornhub, let's just look at Louisiana, they say their traffic has dropped 80%. Their traffic has obviously dropped 100% in the states that it's simply not operating in anymore, including, I believe, Virginia and Mississippi. So that's incredibly big news across the board for millions of people's daily lives in those states, and for a massive industry as well. It's also reverberated. This Politico magazine story was shared everywhere on the right yesterday. It's reverberated in Washington because of this idea that online pornography was too big to fail. Maybe is the best way to put it. That it was too hard to do anything. It would be like sort of trying to clean the beach, right? Trying to sweep up the beach with a broom and get that sand off the beach is sort of how people viewed online pornography. And the lesson is not just about online pornography for people in Washington, but it is that reasonable laws can have massive consequences, that some problems aren't too big for legislation. And maybe you disagree with these particular state laws, but it should be a lesson for all politicians that when you have a problem you consider serious, there are ways, even if it seems overwhelming and impossible, reasonable legislation that is not overly intrusive. So the porn industry in this case is their trade association. A lot of people probably know this is called the Free Speech Coalition, and I don't think it's unreasonable, of course, to say that there's free speech implications in regulation of pornography. But we have plenty of regulation around the Second Amendment. And I argue, of course, for minimal regulation around the First Amendment. But age verification laws are hardly an undue burden on the online pornography industry. This is very specifically tailored to online pornography and very specifically about age verification. And so if you want to peddle something that we are learning is as powerful as online pornography, there's mounting evidence. Of course, the Free Speech Coalition would dispute this evidence and say it's not conclusive, it's not serious, but there's evidence that this affects people's dopamine reactions in their brain, especially as they're younger. So they have minds that are still being formed and in those stages of brain development, that online pornography can be very addictive. It can create issues or can lead to issues. It can influence issues like erectile dysfunction. There's some evidence suggesting that. There's some evidence suggesting it actually has has harmful effects on your dopamine pathways. Your ability to experience sexual pleasure in a healthy way can be harmed by online pornography. And again, whether or not you agree with any of that, the big takeaway to a lot of people here in Washington is that on this sort of state level, you can take small measures that have huge consequences for hugely consequential issues, to the point where those issues are feeling overwhelming to legislators in this new era. And that has big implications, I would also say, for AI. How much is that argument trotted out that we really can't do anything when it comes to AI because it's already out of our hands? And that's probably a big argument people are making right now in states like Louisiana. It's like, okay, well, people aren't going to PornHub. They're still finding their pornography somewhere. I'm sure there's truth to that. And I look forward to reading the evidence about whether or not that's happening, the degree to it, how it's happening, and what's going on with that. But I still think it's incredibly important to look at how these laws can shape behavior, even if they're small and they're not massively intrusive. This isn't it would be hard to argue. Even conservatives, and especially conservatives in this case, but even sort of pro-business conservatives look at this and say, well, yeah, that's not like the most intrusive step into the free market or the economy that you could possibly conceive of. And I would argue, again, this is important, as Politico points out, we're looking at some Democratic governors signing this. Well, one of the activists started a push for this by watching Billie Eilish on Howard Stern. When Billie Eilish said, quote, "I used to watch a lot of porn, to be honest. I started watching porn when I was like 11. I think it really destroyed my brain, and I feel incredibly devastated that I was exposed to so much porn." Quote, "I think it really destroyed my brain." Washington takes a long time to catch up often with younger people because Washington is disproportionately older. But as the rate of technological change increases, it makes it more and more important for Washington to understand technological change, the effect of technological change on younger and younger people who are using that technology much differently than your average senator or representative or governor or state legislature. And that is another hugely important issue of all of this. You know, do people understand in Washington? I mean, remember those famous clips of senators trying to understand Facebook? We feel like they've caught up on Facebook now, which makes sense because it's all boomers anyway. But have they caught up on things like online pornography? No, because it's different. We look at the levels. We see the average age that people are exposed to online pornography, the average age of regular use starting of online pornography, when that's happening over the course of 10 years as your brain is developing. So from the ages of like 13 to, let's say, hypothetically 23, whatever that is, this has never happened before in human history, that people have access to this volume of pornography so easily and for such a long period of their developing lives. So I think it's absurd to dismiss these things out of hand. I'm sure some of the evidence on the anti-pornography side, like it was in the 90s when people were fighting about this, and you had Andrea Dworkin and all those folks saying, you know, we need to regulate this. The feminist position on this has to be anti-porn. I know some of those arguments were spurious, although we were talking about a very different kind of pornography back then than, the volume, the difficulty of regulating something like PornHub's content, for whether or not it involves things like trafficking, for whether or not it involves things that are violent and beyond the pale of what people should be able to make money off of and what people should be able to serve up to young children. This is a very, very different time. Again, I'm sure some of these arguments are spurious. I'm not saying they're all made in good faith and they're all from people who really do believe in free speech, but there's an incredibly reasonable position here, which is that we don't know. We have some really, really negative signs of how this has affected developing brains, how this has affected people around the world, and we don't know simply the extent of how bad that is. There's plenty of evidence to suggest how bad it is, and there are reasonable measures that can be taken on a small level that don't dramatically curb the First Amendment just because they're age laws, and can have a hugely consequential effect and can be bipartisan and can be from both the left and the right, something that people agree on. So Ryan, this has been really interesting to see these 7 states, some from different backgrounds, pass these laws. Have you noticed how this is? I know this is it's always been a raging debate on the sort of the feminist left between your Andrea Dworkins, your Camille Paglias, your people who are sort of the sex positive feminism that seem to win out over the last 20 years, and then even people like Michelle Goldberg taking some steps back and saying, well, maybe we do need to rethink some of this. How is this landing on the left?
Other than folks like Michelle Goldberg, who are, I think, admirably willing to kind of run up against the grain, you pretty much have hegemony for the kind of sex positive side, even if maybe there's some stirrings in the younger generation of saying that maybe the pendulum it needs to swing back a little bit in the other direction. So you don't see much on the left, although clearly there's not. It's not a high enough priority issue that a blue state like Virginia couldn't pass this law that has PornHub shutting down there. So I think what you see kind of in the culture and on social media doesn't necessarily translate into the halls of power. I'm usually really skeptical of companies when they're claiming that regulation is going to destroy them, and so therefore they have to leave the state. It's usually, it's very often that these companies are just using their market power as political power and trying to bludgeon them into basically repealing the laws, or to say to other states, look, if you do the same, then this is what's gonna happen next. A lot of this to me should be up to parents rather than up to Virginia, and that kids shouldn't have devices that are capable of doing this. And that that's the one part where I'm sympathetic to the Pornhub argument. Their argument is that the controls should be on the device, that the device should have settings that only allow it to reach certain sites, and porn sites should be by far the first that they don't get to. But then there's lots of other stuff, like most YouTube videos. Maybe they're not even ready for this show.
This YouTube video, yeah.
this YouTube video, that's right. But there's so much on there that kids just don't need until they're much older.
My answer to that is definitely like, why not both? Because I agree with that completely. And a lot of the content, I think, is designed in a way that is intentionally addictive and is having real effects. I mean, there are plenty of scientific studies on the neurology, the neurological effects of social media. And I think we will see a push towards regulation. That is, we have age laws for buying cigarettes. You have age laws for marijuana in some states. And even as generally a limited government person, I'm fine with age laws for the consumption of cigarettes. Maybe seatbelts are a different question, but age laws in some cases are entirely reasonable. So the other thing I'm waiting for, Ryan, is the Pornhub argument then to be used by the sort of the small porn business, and saying like, oh, it's very easy for Pornhub to do age verification in Louisiana, but us little guys, maybe Pornhub flips at one point and is like, yes, age verification, because then we can shut down all of our little competitors who don't have the technological resources to do comprehensive age verification.
Yeah, but these smaller competitors are so fly by night that I would imagine that they'll just pop up and continue. Because if you shut them down, they just pop up with a different URL. Like it's different than a social media company like competing with Facebook or Twitter, because they need massive scale and network effects to be successful. These little tiny porn companies don't need that. They just need some way to get to these users who are no longer have access to Pornhub in Louisiana or Virginia.
Yeah, absolutely. So
or
that's
Utah.
actually
Wasn't surprised to see that Utah. Yeah.
No, Utah is the least surprising of the states included on that list. Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.
Help us build independent news and get the full show every morning at breakingpoints.com.